Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Crone, the chair of academic programs here at Bard Graduate Center, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our second Wednesday evening event of the season. And it's really very, very great to see so many alumni and friends of friends and friends of the BGC and faculty and all of you. So thank you all for coming. Here at Bard Graduate Center, we study the human past and cultural history through their material traces and the complex ways in which decorative arts, design, and material culture mediate our own relationships with the past. Our graduate students, faculty, and research fellows do this work cognizant of our own location in time and space. We're situated in 3 landmark buildings on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in the heart of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral territories of the Lenni Lenape people. We're a block away from the former site of Seneca Village, a community of African American and immigrant property owners that was forcibly relocated to create Central Park. And we're in a neighborhood and a city long comprised of global migrants and refugees from war, violence, and economic dislocation. We're here this evening to celebrate Redressing American Fashion, Wear as Witness, an ongoing object-based research project that presents a new framework for understanding fashion in America. We'll hear from many of the contributors to this exciting multimedia project, which includes a new publication. And I should have brought one to hold up. Andrew, can you hold up a copy of the beautiful thing? Yeah, great. Okay, so a publication, a wonderful website that is just going live, and that's one of the reasons for holding this event this evening. And and some of that is actually produced by the students. And all of this is published by Bard Graduate Center. It's one of our large-scale public-facing research projects with a curricular focus. So it emerged through a series of semester-long classes taught by Lauren and Emma, who I'll formally introduce in a moment, in which they shared their knowledge of fashion history and exhibition making and intellectual work with students and stakeholders in the project, many of whom are here this evening. And at this moment, I'd like to ask those of you who worked on the project, students who were part of the class, contributors to the catalog, and staff members and curators of BGC just to stand for a moment so you can be publicly recognized in this venue. Please stand. Great to see so many of you here. So from the opening screen of the website, which I hope you'll take a look at, or from the cover of the book, it's immediately clear that this is not a conventional fashion project. Demonstrating independent thinking and a spirit of critical experimentation that centers the voices of the wearers, the makers, and the keepers of a variety of garments that on the surface seem to be ordinary articles of clothing, but which carry material traces of everyday wearers' bodies, such as stains, rips, tears, mending, and signs of handcraftsmanship, and become incredibly important transmitters of historical experience. So just a bit about the 2 co-organizers of the project. Emma McClendon is a fashion historian, curator, and author based in Washington, D.C., and an advanced PhD candidate at the Bard Graduate Center. And she just told me that we have a date for her dissertation defense coming up next session, which is great. So we'll have to have another event to celebrate that. While associate curator at the museum at FIT from 2011 to 2020, she curated numerous critically acclaimed exhibitions, including Yves Saint Laurent, plus Halston, Fashioning the 70s, Denim, Fashion's Frontier, and The Body, Fashion and Physique. Recent publications include Power Mode, The Force of Fashion, published in 2019, and Redressing American Fashion, Wear as Witness, published in 2025. Lauren Downing-Peters is Associate Professor of Fashion Studies and Director of the Fashion Study Collection at Columbia College, Chicago. She holds a doctorate from the Center for Fashion Studies at Stockholm University. Her interdisciplinary research explores the entanglements of dress, the body, and identity, with a particular emphasis on plus-size fashion and standardized sizing, 20th century American fashion, and fashion sustainability. Her publications include Fashion Before Plus Size, Bodies, Bias, and the Birth of an Industry, published by Bloomsbury in 2023, Fashion in American Life, Bloomsbury 2024, and Redressing American Fashion Wears Witness, published by BTC in 2025. So without further ado, I'll welcome Lauren and Emma to the podium, who will in turn introduce all the other participants as they come up to the stage and take place in the course of the evening. So welcome, Lauren and Emma.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the crowd as we celebrate this project tonight. We're going to do a little bit of a round robin throughout the evening. Lauren and I first are going to provide an introduction with some framework of the project as a whole, our methodology, some of the various components. During this part, we'll sort of screen and preview some of the objects, including ones that were on view before the talks. We then have a few words from Jose Blanco, who's going to reflect a bit on the project and its significance within the field. And then we're going to have a little panel discussion. And there's going to be time for Q&A at the end. So please, we would love to hear from all of you and chat about the project more. But okay, diving right in, Lauren and I are going to talk about some of the main pillars of the methodology behind the exhibition. And so, not surprisingly, we're going to talk about some of the key terms that are in the project. So, redressing, wearing, and ideas of witnessing. A major starting point for us as we embarked on the project was confronting the American fashion canon. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with this canon, the traditional canon, who are in the room today. We were grappling with questions of what is a canon and what purpose does it serve. At a fundamental level, a canon shapes collecting. It determines value and determines which stories get told in a lot of contexts. Again, not surprisingly for many in this audience, when I say that the canon of American fashion has traditionally been dominated by designer stories. Designer attribution lends value, and significant events, celebrity, runway presentations, and glossy magazine spreads typically endow further fashion authority. Within this framework, cities and industry spaces become the key backdrops of fashion activity. So with this project, we wanted to provide a new framework, a framework for troubling the canon, for rethinking, redressing, who gets recognized as participating in and advancing fashion, and also provide a framework for rethinking the spaces and places of fashion. To do this, we employed a case study approach. In this project, we look at individual worn objects and position them as witnesses to personal fashion activity, experience, and creativity that is vital to how fashion has developed within the United States over the last 250 years. Another key starting point for us as we were developing the exhibition was the stereotypical American uniform, if you will. Blue jeans, white t-shirt. From figures like James Dean, Marlon Brando, brands like Levi's, this uniform has a unique relationship with the American mythos. It's simultaneously extremely mundane, a staple of many people's everyday wardrobes, but it's also symbolic of an ideal of American rugged individualism. And yet this traditional construct of the uniform is extremely limiting, typically connected to an overarchingly white and masculine ideal of American individualism. By focusing on case studies on actual worn garments, we found that we can trouble this construct and inject underrepresented narratives into the history of the American uniform and celebrate how denim, jeans, t-shirts, sneakers, for example, have always been worn by a diversity of bodies and in a diversity of forms. A key example of this is one of our case study objects that is featured in the book. Kaku Kumasaka's denim jikatabi boots from 1923. These are in the collection of the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. Kumasaka was a Japanese picture bride, as they were known, one of thousands of Japanese women who were married to Japanese men in Hawaii in absentia through an arranged marriage program. Many of them, including Kumasaka, set sail from Japan with visions of cosmopolitan life in Honolulu, only to end up working on pineapple and sugarcane plantations when they arrived. As they adapted to their new climate, labor, and circumstances, this community of women created a hybrid style of self-fashioning, mixing materials, designs, and silhouettes. Kumasaka's denim jikatabi, which are hand-sewn, heavily worn, patched, mended, and reworn, expand the lexicon of American denim, but they also can be understood as equally symbolic of a rugged determination and individualism as a pair of Levi's jeans.
So, in addition to developing a checklist that foregrounded case study objects that variously expanded and troubled our understanding of the American fashion canon, we also sought out objects that challenged common assumptions about fashion museology and specifically what kinds of objects are suitable for saving and for display. Whenever you flip through the book and look at our case study objects, you'll surely be struck by the wornness, to borrow Ellen Sampson's term, of everything: the stains, visible mending, and the threadbare patches. In fashion curating and conservation, these signs of wear are often treated as liabilities, as problems that need to be addressed through careful conservation or disguised through thoughtful display tactics that mediate the messy ordinariness of everyday life. For us, however, it's precisely the universal, ordinary experience of wear and the traces of destruction that it leaves behind that interested us. Throughout this project, we thought a lot about Elizabeth Wilson's famous quote from Adorned in Dreams, where she writes about the eeriness of the costume museum, of the uncanny, uncomfortable feelings that arise when we engage with objects that clearly, visibly touched human bodies. It's natural to recoil whenever you encounter a blood or sweat stain or to mentally relegate damaged dress to the proverbial rag bin. We, however, chose to lean into and celebrate the haunted eeriness of worn dress in this project, to highlight, celebrate, and analyze the dirt and damage. Throughout the book, we reframe wear as a witness to not just the experience of donning clothing, of fabric on flesh, but to the specificity of navigating American life. Wear, we argue, fundamentally unites us. It is perhaps actually one of the few things right now that we all have in common. We all wear clothing. But it's also a disciplinary technology that has created and upheld norms of American identity and embodiment. Dress marks and defines who is American and who gets to enjoy the privileges of citizenship. Extending these ideas, we argue that dress objects function as important, if often overlooked, witnesses to our collective histories and to our individual experiences. The idea of wear as witness therefore conceives of history as a collective of many voices, experiences, and memories. It's a community-based understanding of historical production. Yet, while human witnesses tell, non-human witnesses, like dress objects, show. The objects at the center of our project therefore bear witness to bodies that are unique, but together, as a community, they begin to form a new collective vision of American style and aesthetics, but more broadly, too, of Americanness. An example that we drew upon throughout this project to unpack and explore these ideas is the white t-shirt, an object that exists in our collective imagination as the other half of the American uniform, the first half being those jeans we talked about before. Whenever we picture this object, we see in our mind's eye the pristine white t-shirt, perhaps fresh from the package. We all know, however, how ephemeral this state of pristine newness is. The white t-shirt is a veritable canvas for stains, or what we might more euphemistically describe as the residue of lived experience. The worn t-shirt is therefore a more truthful document than one in a pristine state. Throughout redressing, we dive into the messy subjectivity of bodily traces by drawing on philosopher Kelly Oliver's definition of witnessing as deeply connected to justice and ethics. Through this theoretical lens, the messy traces of the body add fundamental value to dress objects that can help us rewrite history. For instance, Leo Baker's heavily stained t-shirt bears abject traces of exertion in the form of sweat, dirt, and blacktop residue from a grueling day of skating. You can see where his body hit the blacktop as he fell and where he wiped sweat from his brow over and over as he continued to get back up and skate. Here's the traditional American ideal of ruggedness, individualism, physical fitness, hard work, and determination imprinted on the white cotton jersey. But these stains also stand as a witness to the transmasculine body's participation in these facets of the American national mythos. As much as we were able throughout this project, we wanted to center the voices of these wearers as well as makers, utilizing personal testimony as the primary method of interpretation. In the book, we place these testimonies alongside the objects and additional contextual photography, a juxtaposition we came to refer to as object dialogues. Our approach built on the long tradition of oral history in the humanities. Many sources also inspired us to pursue this approach. We were inspired by the work of fashion historians Claire Lomas and Lou Taylor, that of the artist and author Emily Spivak, and curator Maura Riley's strategy of polylogue, the introduction of many voices into exhibition making, as a means of curatorial activism. Our goal was to establish memory as a vehicle for introducing quiet and subtler experiences of everyday life and self-fashioning that have often been marginalized in the production of fashion history. This apron was worn by Concepcion Concha Sanchez in the 1920s and 30s. Concha was the matriarch of the Sanchez family who migrated from Mexico in 1912 at the beginning of the Mexican Revolution. The Smithsonian collected this item as evidence of an American experience, that of immigrants who came to the United States in search of opportunity. Though there was immense pressure to assimilate into American life, many of these immigrant groups managed to maintain and share their foodways, such as Concha Sanchez, who fed her family and community in the face of great hardship. This apron grabbed our attention for other reasons, however. We are interested in how, at first glance, the apron conjures images of idealized American mid-century femininity. That image, however, is often whitewashed. The very fact that Concha wore this apron complicates this narrative. In speaking with her grandchildren, however, we came to learn so much more about fashion and daily dress in the 1920s and 30s, and specifically about how people in rural America shopped. We want to play a brief 2-minute snippet from our conversation with you now, and we have the transcript copied here as well.
If you lived in the small town of Fillmore, either you had a car or you didn't. If you had a car, you would go into the city to go shopping, and I mean Los Angeles, not Ventura, which is the largest city in the county seat. But in Fillmore, it was a nice downtown area. I remember the Fillmore Bouderie. We would go there for shoes. There were 2 clothing stores, Martha's and Smith's. And I remember never being allowed to go into Smith's because that's where white people shopped. So we would go to Martha's, and they were also Anglo women that ran Martha's clothing store. But because they were members of our church, my mother knew them, other people in the community knew them, and they knew the Mexican community, so we were allowed to shop there. And they were very nice clothes, so that was our downtown shopping. But once a week on payday on Fridays, there was a gentleman that would come by in a large truck, and his name was Michael George. And he would come in from LA. He would load his truck with all kinds of different clothing, and you would, on Fridays, he'd stop by, and I remember him stopping in front of our house, and he'd honk his horn. You would get out, go up the stairs, and the back of that truck was a complete, little store. You shopped for your clothes there. You could get blankets, you could get robes, pajamas. Men could get work clothes and work boots, and women could get dresses, like everyday dresses, house dresses, as they used to call them. Adrian, do you remember that?
Yes, very, very specifically.
Yeah, and
Michael,
I know, yes.
I remember he spoke Spanish, but he was Jewish.
Yes, I think he was from Syria. And he did speak Spanish. And my grandmother, who did not feel comfortable going downtown, would always shop with Michael George at the truck, and she would call him El Mike. Ahí viene el Mike. Here comes Mike. Here comes Mike.
I remember that.
Yes.
While many of the objects in this project that we feature in our object dialogues do have a known wearer and a known provenance in respect to whose body actually left the signs of wear across the material of the garment, we didn't shy away in the project of featuring objects where there is no assigned wearer, where the wearer is unknown, because anyone who has worked in a museum collection or who has even shopped vintage will know that clothing carries traces of bodies, and the previous wearer, is simply unknowable. But that doesn't mean that unnamed wearer is not a part of fashion history. The traces that they leave on these garments inject their body, inject their presence, bring their existence into the present on the surfaces of these objects. On the screen here is another one of our case study objects. It is one of a pair of sneakers, child sneakers, found by Jason DeLeon, pictured here, who's head of the Undocumented Migrant Project. He runs an Archaeology of the Border project out of UCLA, and he found these sneakers inside a backpack in the Sonoran Desert at a site where migrants are ordered to discard personal belongings before making the final crossing into the United States. The small sneakers are heavily worn, and they actually bear handwritten messages written in ballpoint pen. You can see it, just one of them just here on the side. This one reads, Extraño los besos, I miss your kisses. It is likely that these sneakers were carried in the backpack as a memento of a loved one left behind. So these shoes attest to the power of worn garments as vehicles of memory, but they also bear witness to the perilous quest for American citizenship, complicating the traditional narrative of the American sneaker. While we were working on this project, it started out initially as an exploration of history, a reframing of how we approach fashion history. But it quickly became very apparent to us, particularly when working with students and members of the BGC community, the power that this carried in how we approached our own wardrobes or thought about how we participate in fashion every single day. And so it is also at this point that I'd like to give a shout out and a thank you to everyone that we worked with here at BGC and our collaborators. A special shout out to Jesse Miranda and Julie Fuller, who are here, for building the online platform. These are some screen grabs. I really hope we passed around some QR codes, right? Where hopefully... Okay, we'll have them at the end so that you can get to the website, because I would say that in addition to the book, which of course contains, the content that we're discussing here, online we have a really rich interactive component where you can hear some of these recordings, so you can hear the voices of our collaborators, you can zoom in on some of the objects. But there's another key component that lives online as well, which is in this behind the scenes, as you see here. This really highlights work that we did specifically with the students. I will say that BGC acted as a wonderful incubator for this project, particularly in our work directly with the students. As Deborah said in her wonderful introduction, a cornerstone of these projects are the classes that we teach as part of them. We ran 2 separate courses here at the BGC, one in the spring of 2023, one in the spring of 2024, with a wonderful group of students in each. The first iteration really helped us think through our case studies, how we approach fashion history. The second iteration turned our attention more to digital humanities and public humanities, thinking about how to bring in contemporary objects and contemporary wearers and the voices of everyday people and our community into the project itself. And so throughout the semester, this work culminated in a series of video interviews, 2 of which we're going to play for you to see, that the students conducted themselves, edited themselves, and really sort of led the making of. And we hope that the 3 initial interviews that we have, what we're calling a sort of living wardrobe part of the website, is just the beginning of an ongoing project, something that we hope to add to in different iterations of the project. We've got 2 videos that we're going to show. The first one is with one of our collaborators who also contributed to the book, who's going to come and sit with us on a panel later, Michelle McVicker, who works at the Antonio Ratti Textile Center at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And she's going to talk about her nameplate necklace in the video. And then the other one that we're going to share is another collaborator who's with us here tonight, Jonathan Michael Square, who's a professor at Parsons School of Design, which he explores the significance of a set of coveralls. So with that, I think we control it here. Right? Okay. I'm like, and here's the beautiful website that you can all get to. Here is how you get, and I will say it is they've added so many features on here, and this page in particular has the videos that we will play, but it also has a lot of information produced by the students themselves, documenting the process. Okay, so with that further ado, I'm gonna get ready for your close-up, guys. Okay, I'm gonna play Michelle and then Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, who gets to be American, I think, is the greater question first. And then within that, what is the fashion that represents who is considered to be American? And I just saw a post recently about the categories in the census, and that was always something that really frustrated me when I was applying to colleges, is there are those boxes that we're all very familiar with, but there are some that are specifically white, non-Latino, or non-Hispanic. And it's like, but what if you're both, like myself? Through my experience with fashion studies, I've gained a much more layered appreciation for this piece of jewelry. I was gifted it at some point in middle school. And I remember I have a few year class pictures where I'm wearing it. But then one day, unfortunately, my family's apartment got robbed. Not that we had much to steal. And this was one of the few things that wasn't stolen because I wore it to school that day. And it had an opposite effect where all of a sudden I felt that it was too precious to wear daily and I hid it away. So I don't quite, I think that was around when I was 12 years old. Flash forward to my mom hit some hard economic times, and in the early 2010s, gold was pretty valuable, and we ended up selling the chain. And I was left with just the nameplate, and I remember having to kind of put up a fight to say, please don't sell my nameplate. And there is a real sense of validation when you see your name already pre-populated into a piece of jewelry because it tells you you exist, you matter, right? We expected you. That's huge.
And next up, we have Jonathan's interview, which he's seeing for the first time.
This is a Dickies coverall, short sleeve. I've had this for a number of years. To know me is to know that I love coveralls. I wear them quite often. My grandfather lived in Dickies coveralls. He would wear Dickies coveralls, a ribbed tank underneath, slip-on kids, paisley bandana that he would wipe his brow with whenever, because I'm from Louisiana, it's hot, so you're constantly wiping the sweat off your face. And then he also wore a trucker hat. Before the early 2000s trend and wearing the trucker hat, he would wear the trucker hat. And so Dickies traditionally is workwear for people engaged in blue collar labor. But he wore it because he worked in construction, so it's a uniform that he wore. And even after he retired, long after he retired, he still wore these Dickies coveralls because they're quite comfortable and durable and chic. So when I wear these coveralls, I'm thinking about my own grandfather and African American heritage and how I came from, people who worked on plantations and worked in agricultural labor and in blue collar labor. But I'm also tapping into a larger African American narrative. There was another facet of protest dress that sort of shows solidarity with sharecroppers and agricultural laborers, and I think I'm tapping into that history when I wear these coveralls. Trayvon Martin participated in a NASA program. And for this NASA program, he actually wore Dickies coveralls. And his parents donated those Dickies coveralls to the Smithsonian. And so when I first started wearing these coveralls, I wasn't tapping into that history because I'm older than Trayvon Martin if he were still alive. But it does add an extra layer of resonance to the garment and its connection to African American history. I'm really excited about the prospect of these coveralls being in a fashion exhibition. It's not, haute couture by any means. It's traditional American workwear, but I think it's a really beautiful garment. Frank James Simmons, my grandfather, would be very shocked to see me turning this very utilitarian garment into a museum-worthy piece, but I think he would understand the importance and significance of me doing so.
And with that, we're now so excited to hand the floor over to Jose Blanco. Jose Blanco is Associate Professor at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and he's co-author with Raul Vazquez Lopez of the recently published Dressed Fashion and National Identity in Puerto Rico, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the soon-to-be published Global Perspectives in Fashion and Dress. He's also the editor of the 5th edition of Meanings of Dress and has contributed chapters to several books and published in journals, including Critical Studies in Men's Fashion, Fashion Theory, Dress, and Fashion Style and Popular Culture. And Jose, we've invited him to speak tonight because he wrote a really beautiful essay in the book reflecting on the broader context in which we are in which we developed this project. And he's also such an important figure in the field who can speak to the growth and evolution of our study of American fashion over the years. So Jose, you'll come up and join us.
Thank you. They're much taller than me, so I want to make sure that you can hear. Yes. I prepare notes, which I finally got. They told me to talk for 7-ish minutes. So you can start the clock, and if I go over, like in the Emmys, I will donate money to the Boys and Girls Club. So I was very honored when Emma and Lauren asked me to write the prologue for this book. I was very excited reading the material and taking notes. Then I reviewed my notes and I told my husband, Raul, that I did not remember how I came up with the phrase, fashion is such a thin word for so much. I thought I was so smart. Then Lauren reminded me that that was something I read that someone else had said, Kiowa beadwork artist Terry Greaves, who came up with that fantastic phrase. So advice, take better notes than I do so that you spare yourself the embarrassment. But the thing is that I was so obsessed with that phrase, the idea of fashion is such a thin word for so much. And I always think about our obsession in academia with terms. We go to academic conferences and people speak the entire weekend about should we call it dress, should we call it fashion, should we call it what? People get in fights in social media and insult each other about this, and we spend hours on this. Sure, fashion is about change, whether it's fast or slow, or trends or not, or whether it's Western or not. But besides being such a thin word, I also think that fashion can be a really dirty word. So I like the term dress. Dress through is a controversial term, but I feel it can encompass the idea that the ways we transform our bodies reflect personal and social and cultural practices and identities that can exist inside or outside the exploitative, capitalist, and unjust endeavor of the fashion industrial complex. I see this every day looking at my students at FIT. Emma and Lauren invite us in here to think of American fashion through their lens of redress, which gives us the opportunity to explore how the study and exhibition of American dress has been centered around capital F fashion, thus ignoring the lived dress experiences of people like me and perhaps people like you. Emma and Lauren motivate us to consider the stories that have been left behind and, as they say, in the cracks of fashion studies and museum displays. There are plenty of those stories hidden in the cracks. So it's time to crack open the cracks and let those stories come out. But since the project centers on individual experiences, as you learned from Lauren and Emma a moment ago, individual experiences of wearing, making, mending, and self-fashioning, we are bound to encounter objects that show how lived experiences and the garments that survive them are far from perfect garments displayed at design and art museums, as if they never had any contact with human bodies. I came into close contact with this many years ago while I was curating with Raul. I do everything with Raul. The exhibition at Billy Carter's service station in Plains, Georgia, where we proudly displayed mud-caked boots, t-shirts with tons of stains, probably from Billy Beer, if you're familiar with Billy Beer. If not, look it up. And other less than perfect garments that nonetheless perfectly illustrated the story we wanted to tell of the famous or infamous Billy Carter, the brother of President Jimmy Carter. We learned that stains and tears and other remnants of the body are beyond beautiful. They are intriguing open books for understanding and interpreting objects that were once part of living bodies. Experiencing life, which is a messy endeavor. So, why would the clothes that we leave behind not be messy? This discovery was part of the inspiration to create Body Damage. This was an exhibit that I curated, guess with whom? With Raul at the University of Georgia in 2013. The other part of the inspiration, well, years before, we wanted to put on display this beautiful evening dress that was worn by the wife of a Georgia politician, but it had very clear sweat stains on the armpits. And they told me that the family would be very embarrassed to see that dress on display. I just thought, well, maybe she was having a lot of fun that night on a very hot, sweltering heat Georgia night, and this is what we have from that. So we could not display that dress, but then later we went through the collection looking for pieces that exclusively showed what we had come to understand as the sublime remains of bodies in clothes. Made even more poignant when they referenced bodies that were no longer in this planet. Lives lived with purpose by the bodies that once filled those garments. Emma and Lauren explained that the thesis of their project is that dress has been relevant in constructing the American body, in mediating the American experience, and in playing witness to American history. Some of those bodies and ways of dress have complied with norms, some have protested them, and some have merely endured and survived. As a queer Latinx immigrant, I understand that my body and my clothes are on the American periphery in more ways than one. Our American identity is something we perform and negotiate every day. These days, when I can be racially profiled on the streets and be kidnapped by the government in the blink of an eye, this is even more poignant. We spend our lives code switching not just our language, but also the way we modulate our voices, and of course, the clothes we wear, and the way we manage our appearance. That is our daily labor. We resist in the way we self fashion not just our appearance and dress, but everything else in our lives in a myriad of ways that are unlikely seen by those of you who better fit the American mold. If any of the clothes I have donated to some university collection or archive are still here after my death, they may tell part of my story, my American story. They may also be discarded, deemed not worthy of preservation, which is quite likely if institutions continue prioritizing aesthetics over lived experiences. If so, they will die another death, a death by lack of purpose, a lack of meaning determined by someone else, not by me. Yes, redress is connected to the idea of correcting wrongs, and yes, there is plenty of that in the American experience. Those of us with multiple intersectional minoritized identities have experienced this marginalization through our lives, our American lives. And this is what projects like this are so fantastic because we get to see a little bit of our story, our history in there. So we need all eyes, hands, and minds to complete this task and bring to light dress and redress stories that have been ignored or marginalized. I hope that this chat today will inspire all of us. Thank you very much.
So we're going to more formally introduce everyone up here because they're all great friends of ours, but they're also all doing really important work in the field, and we're really excited to chat through the work that we've done as thought partners throughout this project. So I'll begin with Jonathan. Jonathan Michael Square is assistant professor in Black visual culture at Parsons School of Design. He has a PhD in history from New York University, an MA from the University of Texas at Austin, and a BA from Cornell University. Previously, he taught in the Committee on Degrees in History and Literature at Harvard University and was a fellow at the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He is also a curator, and he's curated the exhibition Past as Present, Black Artists Respond to the Complicated Histories of Slavery, which was on view between 2022 and 2023. And he also is currently organizing Almost Unknown, the African American Picture Gallery, 2025 to 2026, which is going to be on at the Winter Thur Museum. He's a proponent of the power of social media as a platform for radical pedagogy, and he founded and runs the Digital Humanities Project, Fashioning the Self in Slavery and in Freedom. And he also was going to loan us his coveralls, which he's also wearing tonight. Dean Hashimoto is a collector of vintage blue jeans. He loaned us the jeans that are on the cover of the book, or I guess the back cover, and which feature very prominently throughout the book. And he's very interested in how objects like his tattered blue jeans may contribute to our understanding about the historical development of denim clothing. He's also a physician and lawyer whenever he's not collecting denim. And he is a medical director in workplace health at the Mass General Brigham, as well as visiting professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and a professor of law at Boston Law School. And he also collects jeans. And last but not least, we have Michelle McVicker. She is Associate Collection Specialist at the Antonio Ratti Textile Study and Storage Center at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She previously worked at El Museo de Barrio, the museum at FIT, and the Costume Institute. And her research interests include how material culture, specifically clothing, embodies Latinx representation in the United States.
So wonderful. So thank you guys so much for joining. As you could tell from our presentation, everyone on the stage has had a major part in the project itself, the book, the website, but also in our thinking through this whole sort of, structure that we're trying to kind of put together in this project. So we want to open up with a question for each one of you, sort of all together as a whole, which is that you've been with us through many stages of this project, and we're curious if after participating in the project in the various ways you have, if it's had any impact on how you think about American fashion, either yourself personally or in your practice or in your work with students. Jose's like, I don't want to answer.
I can start and I will say something real quick. It has reaffirmed something that I do when I teach my classes. I work with students on autoethnography projects where they examine and review their own family history through dress and on the things I cut when I had only 7-ish minutes. It's a conversation that I write about this in the prologue, how important it is for us as educators to motivate people to look at their own clothes as part of American history.
Well, I was really excited about this project. I had known Emma from a distance way back when because of her interest in jeans and denim history. Um, I got involved in collecting jeans through collecting women's jeans, actually. That's really sort of like one of my primary focuses. And it was just such an odd thing. No one collects women's jeans, and so it becomes very easy to collect women's jeans in a sense. But this whole project has sort of reaffirmed to me, the importance of seeking out sort of missing pieces of history. That it's very striking. I mean, I love the cowboy story, that is closely tied to Levi's. It's a wonderful story. And, I collect around Levi's as well. But, it sort of reaffirmed to me that it does make sense for us to explore, and collect and think about sort of missing pieces. Certainly, women jeans is that history is not there, but also sort of denim as it relates to immigrants, um, um, how it relates to those who were enslaved. I mean, it turns out that the missing pieces are actually a bigger part of the picture than the cowboy story, and this sort of really made me very sensitive and made me anxious to continue collecting.
Hello. Yes. Okay, great. It's so nice to be here and to finally have a celebration for this project. I just wanted to take a minute. We've been doing this for a couple years now. I think for me, and of course now I'm touching my nameplate. There was a consideration of including my nameplate in the physical exhibition, and as a former registrar and a collections care professional, I could not get my brain around that concept of having a belonging of mine, given what you saw in the video with the backstory, with the identity I identify with, in public, on display. And I couldn't put an insurance value on it, not that it was asked of me, but just to think about my own belongings, like Jose said, to be used in this framework as objects to interrogate Americanness. I think that was the real test of this project for me personally. And I thank both of you for pushing me to really interrogate that with my piece. And it's made it a lot more, it was already precious, but it's even more precious now. And just to touch upon something Jose also said, like, I know that this is an even bigger marker of who I am and the vulnerability that I'm putting myself in this present moment, and I'm still choosing to wear it.
Great. Well, I just want to start off with thanking you all for this project. It's amazing, and thank you all for being here. This is a really special moment. I'm really thinking through the question, and I guess my response would be is it forced me to think about my own Americanness, which is already an obsession of mine, as you already know. But I mean, the piece that I contributed to the catalog, I think, in a way, forced me to think about my multifacetedness in a way that I hadn't before. Like, I'm used to putting on my historian's hat and pretending like I'm a historian, or, reflecting on my blackness or my queerness. But this project really forced me to think about all sides of myself, not only like as a scholar, but like my family history, my personal history, my own body, how I inhabit a garment. And so, like, I think it's the first time that, as a scholar, that I've been forced to sort of think about not only my blackness, my queerness, my Americanness, my scholarly practice, my creative practice. So it's challenging, but also really positive. So I learned a lot about myself writing the essay. So.
Yeah, it's worth noting too. I don't know that we made this very clear, but both Michelle and Jonathan wrote essays in the catalog as well. So they were going to be loaning their pieces, but then they also wrote really beautiful essays about how their work intersects with these topics as well. So you'll have to buy the book to read them. I can ask the next one since you don't have a mic. Yeah. So our first question, our next question rather, is for Dean. And Dean, we were hoping that you could talk a little bit about your approach to collecting denim. So going in a little bit deeper about why women's denim, where you find it, what the significance of this practice is for you, and in general, what you're looking for, because we know that it's a little bit different from what typical denim collectors are buying on the market.
Yeah, I mean, for me, vintage collecting has always been interesting because of its ties to history, to personal history, to the big picture of history, and that's why I'm so fascinated that so much history has been lost in the area of denim. I, quite honestly, got uh, began. It was sort of a means of connecting myself with my son, who was a vintage clothing dealer. And collecting women's jeans was very convenient because they're very cheap and generally easy to get. And my son, would let me do it because they were cheap, and I'd stay out of his way, while he went after more important things. Um, Unfortunately, he passed away unexpectedly through an opioid overdose. But that even sort of motivated me in some ways even more, quite honestly, because it helps me to remember him, um, and in a lot of ways, I sort of feel close to him. I still feel very close to him today. Um, when I look at a pair of jeans, he had such a good eye for vintage clothing. He could almost instantly tell you, yeah, this is a great piece. Whereas for me, it's like, I have no idea. Give me a couple months. And so, like, my favorite pieces are actually those that I see and I have no idea, but boy, they look really interesting or beautiful, or there's something there that I want to research. I take a much more sort of studied, dull approach to things. I like to spend a couple months with really complex um, old jeans, and so that's the way I collect. I collect especially women's jeans. I'm getting now into like really old jeans. I like 19th century jeans. Um, I don't again, I sort of stay out of the way of most collectors of jeans who focus on Levi's and the jeans like that run in the 1870s through 1890s. What really interests me are jeans before that, and no one's really sort of thought about that because for most, like, the history of denim begins with Levi's, and they began to make jeans in 1873. Well, it turns out that there are these jeans out there that people haven't really examined, and to me, like, even though they're sort of very plain looking, because of the fact that they're old, as you might imagine, jeans became very different in the 1870s once you had factories, putting out this ready to wear, jeans. Whereas before then, the jeans were much plainer. They had fewer pockets or no pockets. So they don't look like much. But I find that there's a certain richness and importance in looking at those materials very closely. Because through looking at wear, looking at their place in history, you can actually figure out quite a bit if you're willing to be patient. So that's sort of like the way I collect.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but you have an amazing Instagram account where you share a lot of your findings and your finds and like do a tremendous amount of research. Do you want to share your Instagram handle with the audience so they can follow you?
Yeah, it's basic. It's my name. Again, I'm so awkward, Jenny. I had no idea you're supposed to have a really cool name for your account. So mine is just Hashimoto.Dean. And you can see that I'm really sort of the best in terms of like women's jeans. So these really old, odd jeans that no one else collects. That's my account.
Thank you, Dean. Our next question is for Jonathan, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the essay that you wrote for the catalog, and specifically talking a bit about how your grandfather's coveralls, your relationship to coveralls connects to your current design practice, and what has drawn you to integrate design into your more traditional academic work.
Yeah, great question. Like I said in the video, like when I think about my grandfather, I think about him in these Dickies coveralls. So I wear them partially in like homage to him. He had a look like it was these. He always had like a paisley bandana that he kept in his pocket right here. He wore a trucker hat before trucker hats became popular, and he wore like these slip-on kids, and that was his look. So I always incorporate that look some way into my design practice. First off, I just love coveralls. I think I love an all-in-one outfit. It's like wearing a banana peel. I always feel like a superhero when I wear coveralls. Like you just put it on, and you have on an outfit. So I just love working with that idea, and also it just feels like a garment of the future. I wasn't trained as a designer. I was trained as a historian. But as of late, I've been experimenting, dabbling in design. And one thing that I always go back to, like a garment that I just love playing around with, is the coverall. So I have different versions of coveralls. I have a version made from like recycled Brooks Brothers shirting because I'm interested in the company Brooks Brothers. Long story, but they make clothing for enslaved people. So I have a pair of coveralls made out of a Brooks Brothers shirt. I have another pair made out of like a upcycled J. Crew shirting. So I make different versions of these coveralls, but this is like the pair of coveralls that I always go back to. It's like the template for like several other coveralls. I gotta be honest, they're starting to get a little tight. That's the thing about having a body. It expands and contracts. I'm in an expansion mode right now. But yeah, that's kind of the story behind my obsession with coveralls. It's like it's part personal, but also just on a aesthetic level. I love wearing coveralls.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you want to share your brand's Instagram for the audience so they can follow your design practice?
Sure. The Instagram is northstar.nyc. And of course, North Star is a reference to Polaris, like the celestial body that enslaved people used to find their way to freedom up north. And so, like, I'm drawing on like African American history, drawing on my family's history, but just drawing on things that I think are interesting and animate me.
So we have a question for Michelle next, which is, you've mentioned sort of you've worked in collection management and you've worked with collections at a number of different institutions. And so we've both heard you kind of talk about your encounters with worn garments. And we were just wondering if you could speak a bit more about that and how some of these encounters have had an impact on your research, your practice in the field.
So I guess the piece was very reflective and it took a very long time to get out of me, but I start the piece with the moment I discovered that fashion history was a potential career. I'm from Chicago and I was an intern. I was 16 and I was at the Chicago History Museum, and we were able to shadow different staff members during my internship there. And we shadowed the costume curator at the time, and they were taking out a Charles James butterfly dress from a blue board box, and they took off the lid and it just exploded. And I wept. And we have to remember this is over 16 years ago, and all of this popularity of Instagram and YouTube, and the words to this career weren't as popular or weren't as known. And I was like, who are these dress doctors wearing these aqua gloves and these lab coats? Like, what is this? And that was really kind of when I got the bug. But something I think you will see throughout the piece, and that I continue to interrogate, is why did that moment impact me so much when I'm not represented at all? And I know it's true for a lot of us that study fashion history, right? And I don't have the answer, right? But I think that kind of interrogation is where it started. And now reflecting on over a decade of collections care experience and having unbridled access to collections in a variety of places, I have the privilege to see these signs of wear, and I don't think that that's fair. I have the privilege of seeing, period stains in a play suit, which tells me this woman went to the beach even when she was on her period, right? That's great. I'll never forget, there was a Liberty dress that had a grain of rice in a pocket, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's from when they threw the rice at the wedding, right? And that's not what you encounter in the label text. It is becoming more popular. These interrogations are getting more steam. But I have countless of those encounters, and I just want to be able to communicate that. I want people to feel seen. I want people to feel heard. I think that's why the idea of having this on display was really impactful for me. Why the idea of things like documenting the nameplate, shameless plug, that's my Instagram, you should all follow. But similar to how Jonathan uses social media to interrogate these gaps in the canons, crowdsourced images are the way to go. There's plenty of fashion from diasporas, from other communities to be disseminated. It's a matter of, just because it's not being acquired by a museum doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So by default of having access to museum collections, I'm able to determine what's missing and what's also still out there. And I think that's kind of where I'm at this moment.
Okay, this will be our last question for the panelists, then we'll turn it over to the audience so you all can start thinking of your questions. But this last question is for Jose, and we would love to invite you to talk about your brand new book, Dress, Fashion, and National Identity in Puerto Rico, co-authored with your partner in everything, Raul Vasquez Lopez. How do you two see Puerto Rico's fashion history reshaping or complicating what we mean whenever we talk about American fashion?
Well, I gotta be honest, I got a hint about this question earlier this afternoon. Thank God, because then I could talk to Raul about it, who should be the one answering. But so most of what I'm gonna say is he's much smarter than I am. So told me this, but we had a nice conversation before I left to teach today about how you can see Puerto Rican fashion kind of in four levels. One is Puerto Rican fashion from Puerto Rico, the island, then Puerto Rican fashion as part of Latin American fashion, which is, of course, part of that. Then Puerto Rican fashion as being part of the diaspora, right? And then Puerto Rican fashion as being American, because Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. So that makes it like really kind of like very difficult to like answer this, which I'm going to take the opportunity to invite you to our presentation at the Museum at FIT on October 7th, Tuesday, October 7th. We are going to be in conversation with Tania Melendez about our book. But one thing that Raul said immediately that was really interesting is how we would have given you a completely different answer when we wrote the book than now. And it is all because of one thing and one thing only, Bad Bunny. And the Bad the Bad Bunny residence in Puerto Rico has really had an impact. He has featured local Puerto Rican designers in all the shows. One piece that was in one of the Bad Bunny concerts will be part of our conversation. We'll have the piece at FIT if you want to come see it. So this has like awakened an interest on people in Puerto Rico to to look at Puerto Rican history and embrace that and be more Puerto Rican and be more openly Puerto Rican. And in these times when again we're being persecuted. And by the way, I'm not from Puerto Rico. I'm from Costa Rica. He is Puerto Rican. Um, very important. It is really essential, and it's a daring way to be. So I think that Puerto Rican fashion becomes that. And then the other thing that Raul gave me to say that was very good was, we used to see like the famous pava hat. You may have seen Bad Bunny in several photos with the pava, the straw hat, which was kind of like a folkloric type of thing. But now you see it on fashion collections. You see bags, handbags made of to look like a pava hat and so on. So it's this great awakening of pride, which is happening not just with Puerto Rican immigrants, but not immigrants, with Puerto Ricans in the U.S. and everywhere in the world. But frankly, I hope to see Mexicans just going crazy with their because they are immigrants, illegal or not, part of the American history at the moment.
No.
We'd love to turn it over to all of you now to ask questions of our panelists about the project, whatever you want.
I get first, thank you. Oh, hi everyone, that was amazing. Thank you so much. This is so exciting. So I don't know how I'm going to ask this, but what happens next? What's the future once the floodgates are opened, which thank God they are, and we can now look at real clothes and real people and experience and all the things we're talking about? How do you then differentiate between this and that? What are the parameters for the curators of exhibitions, for collectors and museums, if we now have real people's clothes? Where do you stop? Where do you start? And also, I have to ask about where are the men's? Does mending count? Where is that part of the? Is that a special category?
Do you want to me? So I would say mending is something that we touch on a lot in the book and is always something that we're very interested in. I think for us, this particularly sort of looking at men's both shows the signs of wear but also shows the care and shows the longevity of garments. They're so important to this story. I mean, I will say that for Lauren and I, in writing this and working with this, and I was formerly in a museum, but us both being more outside the museum establishment, I think that there's a certain radical kind of proposition to this, right? Which is sort of a cop out because I'm saying I don't have a concrete answer for you of where it starts and where it ends. But I do think that for us, it was a very conscious provocation that we're saying everything can be fashion, that we're saying that everybody can matter. And that was conscious on our part. But we recognize that presents a challenge, but we hope that that's a challenge that people accept and take up, and rather than clinging to the limiting factors that have been a sort of safe haven for these more restrictive collecting policies. But again, it's easy for us to say that not being museum professionals. So it's, again, I would say kind of a conscious provocation in that sense. Lauren, if there's
I don't know. I feel like it forces kind of a shift in fashion museology and curating too, because the fancy institutions don't actually have a lot of the stuff that we were interested in. I think it's notable that as we were constructing our object list, we were like going to the National Museum of American History and the Smithsonian, and not the Costume Institute, not FIT. So I don't know. I think that there's an exciting opportunity for fashion exhibitions to happen increasingly outside of those kinds of institutions. How that happens is something for you all to figure out because there's funding and institutional red tape and stuff that makes that work challenging. But I think one thing that's exciting for me is the response to this project. I've talked with my students about it, we've talked with our peers about it, and everybody seemed to think it's pretty cool. So I think it's nice that we've arrived at a place where people are interested in things that in the past would have been garbage or neglected.
And I would also say that this is not a project that is happening in a vacuum. You know, there are many projects that are exploring similar aspects, such as Alexis. Is Alexis Romano here? I would say. um, who did a fabulous exhibition on Staten Island Mode, sort of thinking about these very questions of sort of a local space, a local community, and what it means to have style and fashion in that place, and talking to actual community members and putting on garments that have signs of wear. Another exhibition that we highlight in the book is the Museum of Transology, which also takes a similar approach in documenting this material culture of the body and in a very intimate way that challenges typical curatorial conventions. And there's others. Again, we have a whole essay about this in the book, and so I would just say that this is something that we are by no means the only people thinking around. This is really something we take a lot of inspiration from people throughout the field who, like Kate, also who've been working with issues of mending, signs of wear, these stories in the body as it exists in the archive.
It's also worth noting another essay in the catalog by Ellen Sampson, who I think has given us in the field of fashion studies a language for talking about the poetics of wear. So I think we're all like highly indebted to. She couldn't make it tonight, but highly indebted to her for allowing us to see this abject dirtiness through a new lens.
Great. Any other questions?
First of all, I want to say thank you very much. My name is Shelley Mintz. I really have long been interested in this idea of identity and history and clothing. And I want to ask about people consciously making clothing for these kinds of things. You're talking about exploring meaning in them. And I brought something that I made, but it's also to bring another idea of family history and in this my particular case is Judaism. Certainly the Levi's denim history. I grew up in Detroit, another Midwesterner, and it's a way of communicating with our son. This is my Motown, what my husband calls my Bubby biker jacket. And the lining of it is designer sailing material. And so it's the idea for me of my son seeing this thing that I can wear that is, Jews aren't supposed to sail. There's a lot of conflict in Detroit with Jewish and non-Jewish clubs back from the 50s and 60s. And who is Jewish and who is American? That's such a fraught moment at the moment, and I don't want to spend more time on it now. There's a woman named Emily Tamkin who wrote a book called Bad Jews, which is a fabulous idea and discussion of this. But to be from Motown, to proudly say I'm from Motown, to not be Black, but to really identify as that, all of that, it provides a discussion to be able to wear something like this. So I don't know if there are other people who are consciously doing this kind of thing with clothing. I'm a novelist and a textile artist, so I'm writing a lot about these kinds of issues.
I would say, Jonathan, I don't know, you're the maker on the panel.
Maker. I mean, I love what you just said because I think that's the power of clothing and art. Like, you might struggle articulating it and sort of like negotiating those contradictions, but in a garment, I mean, it's really easy to sort of have all those things sort of presented in a way. So I would just say that I think that's why we do what we do. Like, that's why we're fashion studies scholars, because there's a lot of meaning embedded in the clothing that we wear and like the textiles that are made that are easy to sort of articulate materially and not actually verbally. That makes sense. Come up with make their own meaning out of it too. Yeah.
So here's a plebeian question. Where do we get the term jeans or the name jeans? I saw a photograph of a pair from 1856, so they go back a while.
Yeah, it
Why
actually
were they
goes
called
back
jeans?
further than that. Most people, when you ask that question, they go back to Italy, 17th century. Um, um, I think it's really murky. It's one of the reasons why I love collecting jeans. Is denim history is so filled with mythology, made up history. That it's actually interesting. I like made up history. It's just so interesting because in a lot of ways, it reflects culture even more closely. So there's not a good answer to that. The answer I can give you is a more modern answer as to why the term jeans became prevalent when prior to World War II, people were talking about waist overalls, dungarees. But it was after World War II that people began to use the terminology jeans in the way that we're used to today. My viewpoint is of course, that it was because of women. That, the big three, Levi's, Lee, and Wrangler, after World War II, they had tremendous capacity in production because of the war, and having to produce a lot of denim during the war. Suddenly, after the war, they were worried about where they go. And the obvious market was to go after women consumers because up to that point, there really wasn't much participation by women. The idea of wearing denim jeans, was shocking to a lot of people. And obviously, women are not going to go after waist overalls. And so it's then you began to see manufacturers use the terminology jeans a lot. Wrangler, for example, had a line called Genies. So my answer to you, it's because of women and going after women as consumers of jeans that we call them jeans today rather than waist overalls. But that, of course, is pretty obscure, but I believe that that is the answer.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask both the curators if there was, and I know these pieces aren't in a collection that you guys steward, but is there any kind of concern about the ways in which this material can be ephemeral or self-destructive because of the wear, because of the stains? And is there an understanding that they are kind of these transient, like, they might get loaned to your exhibition and then go back to their wear and continue to be worn? So is it important to try and freeze them kind of where they are and hold them as historical objects? Or is it more important to document them and then kind of send them on their way?
I mean, I would say for us working on this, and it's worth maybe noting that this is a project that's an ongoing project that we do very much hope, and we can't officially announce, will have a home as an exhibition in a couple of years at a venue that we're in conversation with. But we can't say, but check back on the website when we have a big announcement about this. But I would say from that perspective, as we think about this in terms of an exhibition and not just a book or an online presence, we have tended to work both with mainly with objects that are in collections, which is what Lauren was mentioning, where we found ourselves going into more social history museums that tend to have objects that are attached to particular wearers given a particular story or narrative, as opposed to being attached to a quote unquote fashion collection. And that's where we found a lot of our objects. But I think, again, it was an interesting curatorial experiment for us to think about this living wardrobes aspect when we're asking Michelle and Jonathan to very consciously take an object out of the rotation of their own wardrobe and everyday wear and isolate it as a museum object for a short period of time, consciously knowing it's then going to go back, and who knows what's going to happen to it then. I mean, for us, again, as academics, it's an interesting experiment to see how that can challenge curatorial practice, this notion of living objects, objects that get suspended sort of in time in a museum context, but that aren't forever and preserved, a sort of celebration of ephemerality.
Yeah, and we have a quote in the book from Sarah Scaturo, who observes that whenever garments enter museum collections, they undergo a kind of death. So because they're separated from the body, they're separated from the lives that they were once a part of. And so I guess the point of that is that the garments are always going to die somehow, whether or not they're, preserved in this pristine condition for nobody to really ever see, since such a small proportion of objects ever get put on display. So I don't know, that I don't have an answer to your question, but that quote just came to mind. Yeah, we're always kind of confronting this eventual death of these objects.
So if you've been sitting here tonight wondering, how can I get that book? How can I see that website? You're in luck, because right as you exit, the book is on sale, and there's also beautiful little T-shirts, little pieces you can take with you that have a QR code that takes you to the website. So I hope you'll follow the project and continue to support it. But for now, please join me in thanking this incredible panel.